so I would like to be like thoughtful about it.
Hmm.
And I think there's such a lack of nuance that looks at like what that experience was like. And there's such fascination with it on a cultural level, which I get. Like it's different and there's like some really crazy shit out there.
Hmm.
But I think overall, for me, speaking about it is something that I'll do once I have a better sense of what I think is important to share and
Hmm.
what the purpose is of my sharing. The purpose of my sharing isn't to get a book deal or to get a TV show or to like become known as the cult person. Like, like what is helpful or not helpful in what I'm sharing from a like human condition perspective or from an angle that speaks to other people who've had similar experiences
Yeah.
and like meets a need of theirs. So that's like those are the things I'm interested in talking about, not in like going into more detail in my creative nonfiction so that somebody can have their like get their rocks off and be titillated. Like it's just not that's not what like those are people's lives, not just my life. Like there were 1,000 families in the one that I grew up in at
Hmm.
like its height. Like those are people's like actual lived lives.
Yeah.
It's not trauma porn. It's not like disaster porn. It's not that. And
Yeah.
I think it's really key. So that's why I don't actually want to speak more about the cult thing to your question that we started before we were recording with. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. It was just, yeah, it was on my mind because of that. That's that book that I'm reading called Cultish. And she does talk about how people are kind of obsessed with it, like you're saying, like just kind of like, what was it like? Tell me, like they want to hear it to like be like, ooh, or something, you
I mean,
know?
it's literally like if you are like the bearded lady at the circus or
Yeah.
the tattooed man, those sorts of things where you had like barkers outside, right? Bringing
Hmm.
people. It,
Hmm.
I think it very much has that same sort of vibe to me
Yeah.
when and when I don't get that uh interaction or uh people don't express themselves that way, I'm actually much more likely to have the conversation.
Yeah.
If somebody doesn't respond or react in a like, let me peek behind the curtain sort of way.
Yeah. That makes sense. And the reason that I was asking you about it because I was wondering how it related to your body story. And you said it
Right.
kind of really wasn't a huge factor in,
No, I think it's pretty minimal
yeah.
for me.
Yeah. So what do you think was a bigger factor? Like what, there's probably a few things.
Oh my
So
God, my parents. And actually, it's really interesting because I was having a conversation with a friend the other day, and they were sharing about an interaction that they had had with their mom that had surprised them because their mom growing up was very um, aware of like body positivity.
Mhm.
And my friend was saying to me that, or like not commenting on her daughter's body at all. And my friend was saying that she said to her mom, like, mom, anything that I have, it comes from magazine covers. Like, it's because it's swimming in it culturally. And it
Yeah.
has, like, you were always so good about, like, not talking negatively about your body or about anybody else's body, right? Or, like, eating food or food amounts that you were eating or not eating. And it was more of a, like, don't waste this sort of thing.
Mhm.
Um, if you'd, like, served yourself food, right?
Right.
Which
Right.
is
Like,
different from saying like you have to eat all of the food because you need to eat more and like food equals love. And it's also different from being like, watch what you're eating. Are you sure you want to eat that?
right.
There's such a spectrum between those two spaces.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you have any specific thoughts about your parents? Like something that comes to mind that was like one of the things that is like, oh, that
Well,
made
I
that
think
kind of.
Yeah, I think my parents are too, my mom is still alive and probably won't love hearing this, but like she very much fixates on what she eats and talks about her body.
Mm.
So that's like a thing. I remember I think I've mentioned this to you in like other situations that when I was in gosh, I was probably 10, like I remember doing Sweating to the Oldies
Yes.
VHS with
Yeah.
my mom at 5 o'clock in the morning. Like something I looked forward to. It was
Uh-huh.
exciting because we got to like do this together. And I knew the music because of my dad's age. Like that was the genre of music. Like it was actual oldies, stuff from the 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
Um, and so from like a very young age, that was something for my mom. My dad was kind of the opposite end of the spectrum, I would say, in some ways. He didn't talk about his body, but he did like we had Nutrisystem boxes that we were getting when I was very young because I remember getting in trouble for eating the gummies out of them.
Oh,
Uh
sounds like
which
something I would do.
right, which were like maybe they were vitamins. I don't know what they were. Like I just remember that we never had those in my house. And
Mhm.
so whatever they would have been in the box, like it was a cool treat, right? Didn't understand that that was lots and lots and lots of stupid money amounts to get that system in the house, right?
Yeah.
My dad, I don't know when he started having weight issues, but he was a heavyweight like before he and my mom got married. At one point in my life, he was over 500 pounds, and the doctors gave him like 5 years to live. He smoked. He had a trach that they put in,
Yeah.
like as an emergency sort of situation, and he stopped smoking overnight because he wasn't going to smoke through the trach.
Yeah.
Uh, and he also had like other weird body things. So he died on the table multiple times. He never got anything normal when something went wrong with his body. Like he had flesh-eating bacteria in his legs at one
Yeah.
point that we had to clean out the wounds of. And he had metal rods put in his back multiple times because of his back stuff that was going on. One of the rods like failed and didn't work. I don't know the whole story, but I know my mom has talked about it. And he would I think any of my siblings, if you ask them, like one of our key memories of my dad is him sitting in our living room eating a box of Triscuits, a brick of the pepper jack cheese, and Diet Pepsi. And he would like ask us to bring him the Triscuits or the cheese or whatever. Um, and I mean, I don't like pepper jack cheese, so I don't know if I ever asked, but like there was definitely a clear understanding that like those were his foods. They weren't for communal. And so if we were eating like the Triscuits or the Diet Pepsis, we were stealing them from the fridge and like eating it in secret, right?
Yeah.
Uh, so just I think that's important because I think it kind of shows the like the water we were swimming in, right?
Yeah.
Versus any specific comments that I would identify. Um, I remember when I was in high school, if I wanted to like drill down, when I was in high school, well, probably actually before high school, I had very large feet at a young age.
Okay.
Like so when I was in middle school, like my feet were a size 11, um, as like a seventh grader.
Yeah.
And I remember wearing like lots of baggy sweatshirts, and my dad in the morning when he would drive us places like to school or whatever, we would go to 7-Eleven and fill up, or Highs, it was Highs at the time, we would fill up his 64-ounce like refillable coffee mug that was 99 cents.
Hmm.
And we would put extra, the blue packets, I
Uh-huh.
think he 6 extras in it. Um, and then fill like it essentially was like an entire coffee pot, more or less.
Yeah.
And take it out. And I remember one time when we were at 7-Eleven or Highs, and maybe it was doing that, maybe I was going in for something else, like because he would sit in the car, right? Like
Mhm.
while we went in and got his
Right.
coffee. And
Yeah.
the like treat was that we could get something for ourselves too.
Mhm.
whether it was a candy bar or like a juice or whatever.
Yeah.
And I remember coming back out, and I would have definitely been in junior high, coming back out and him being like, men were looking at your chest because I wasn't wearing a bra.
Okay.
And like he was deeply uncomfortable with that.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
maybe it was because I'd like run. So there'd been a little bit more movement.
Yeah.
I don't know,
Right.
but I mean, I wasn't wearing like anything tight. It would have been fine if I was, but like I was wearing like an over large sweatshirt.
Hmm.
Um, and so in junior high, I think, like most people who go through puberty, I wasn't
Hmm.
like super comfortable in my body.
Yeah.
Um, Prior to that, I'd done a lot of track. I had done like long distance running and not hurdles, but the long jump. And like I loved all
Oh,
of those
cool.
things
Yeah.
so much. Um, s- Team sports weren't really my jam. Like I wasn't extraordinary at them. My youngest sister was like very good at basketball and that became her life.
Mm.
So I tried out, the different sports, but I didn't really like follow any paths for that. But then when I hit puberty, my body didn't really sync in the same ways, like
Mm.
physically move
Yeah.
like it had when I had done track
Yeah.
before. And so that kind of petered away.
Yeah.
Because in my family at the time, and I think this is probably more generational, like you were either smart or you did physical stuff. It
Mm.
wasn't both.
Got it.
Um, and I had done ballet for a really long time. I did ballet up through seventh grade, and the teacher that I had in seventh grade was a new teacher. And I remember her like commenting on how my body wasn't like a ballet body as I was going through puberty.
Mm.
And then in junior high, I think was when it really like tanked.
Hmm.
I went to a private school and we had something called the Army Raiders, which was similar to the Army Rangers.
Okay.
And it was a lot of calisthenics.
Hmm.
So like in order to qualify for it, you had to do push-ups and run a mile and do like sit-ups, and you had to do a certain number within a 1 minute period, I think, or maybe 2 minutes for the push-ups and sit-ups, and then you had a maximum amount of time in order to qualify to be on it. And I did that, and I loved that. Like I loved, I as much as I am anti-military, I really appreciated the like this is the path to success in this area. Like, do this, fill out this paperwork, get this medal.
Yeah.
Do like that for my brain really worked very well. And I was all about like gaming those things.
Hmm.
So I did the Army Raiders and I loved it. Um, they had some wildly inappropriate looking back things. So
Hmm.
like there was that hello dolly move I think I've told you about, where
Yeah.
yeah, where we were like, and again, like they had men and women. They just had
Uh-huh.
everybody like on the ground. So you have your hands under your butt so that you're stabilizing your core and your feet are kind of lifted up and you're spreading your legs in and out. And those were called hello dollies. Like, it was like hello dolly, hello.
Yeah.
Like that's what happens when you have only men who are in charge of the like the ROTC program
Gaming,
at a
right?
school,
Yeah.
right? Like there's just such a lack of awareness around that. And um, well, I feel like I've rambled a lot. What
Yeah.
do you want me
So,
to like, focus on anything or drop
yeah.
into
So
something specific?
I was wondering, so we were talking about how your parents influenced your body and how
Yeah.
you. So I think that so many people can relate to the stories that you've told, right? Like I remember even wearing like hugely baggy things or like feeling like if your parent asks you to do something like, like let me like that's
Yep.
like your little job or whatever. And even though it might not be healthy or like a good example of like
Right.
what you should be doing. That's like what you learn to do. Um, so how did it sound like you said we were that was the water you were swimming in?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting because your parents were so opposite. Like you had your mom who was like, oh, we need to like get up at 5 a.m. and do Richard Simmons and be careful of like whatever else we put in our bodies. And your dad is kind of like, I'll drink a coffee pot in the morning and then eat like Triscuits and Dr.
Right.
Diet Pepsi at night with, cheese, whatever. So did you feel like you like went a particular way, like in thinking because of that, or
I
like did it
think
kind of
the
all?
I think both my siblings and I. So here's the thing, like my mom still talks about what she's eating. She's like, oh, I shouldn't be eating that. Or
Mhm,
we went to the Renaissance Festival recently and she wore a costume that I gave her, like a dress. And some people stopped her and her hair is like mostly gray. And she was showing the pictures to my sister who said to me that my mom was like, oh, everybody was just like, look at this fat, ugly old woman. And that they were, I know, right? And that they were just being nice to her because like she was like pitiful or whatever.
mhm,
And that's my word, not hers.
mhm,
Um, so there was there's such self-deprecation and not in like the cute sarcastic way, which can sometimes be double meaning,
mhm,
but in a like really believing that.
mhm.
Um, and she still is like, oh, I shouldn't eat this or oh, I shouldn't eat that. Um, as she's eating it, and she'll be like, here, eat this to us. And we're like, we don't want it. And she's like, well, but if you don't eat it, then I have to eat it. And so it's like a really interesting interplay that we still see.
Mhm,
Um, I think throughout the years, I definitely, so in high school, I had like a book that I had put exercises in from like Self Magazine and Women's World and some of the ones that
mhm,
my mom got versus some of the ones that were like more age appropriate. And I would do exercises in my bedroom in the basement when I was down there alone in my room, like when I got my own room. Um, and like track everything and measure with a tape measure like my thigh measurements and my butt and my hips and all of that and my like my chest, my waist. Um, I probably still have like some of those notebooks with the measurements in them. Um, and I would also restrict, like I did food restriction for sure.
mhm,
Uh, and I went through a phase where I would like eat food and then spit it out into a cup.
mhm.
So I wasn't like actually eating it, but could taste it.
Yeah.
Um, so I think, so like there was that, but then I also definitely would do like probably not what people would qualify as like actual diagnosed binge eating, and I like never made myself throw up, but
Mhm,
I definitely would like eat a bag of like Doritos, in like over the course of a day. So
mhm,
not like one sitting and not making myself sick with what I eat,
mhm.
but like for sure, I think that we all in my family oscillate between like restriction and overeating
Mm.
versus necessarily falling into one or the other more, which is such a not helpful pattern, right? And it
Yeah.
like really fucks with your body's metabolism. I wish now, like, I wish that what I know now about what that does to like your actual body. And I'd read books, like I read there was a book called Wasted that came out when I was in high school that was by a woman named Maria Hornbacher, um, that talked about like her experience with anorexia,
Mhm,
and there was a lot in there that made it clear that like it really fucked up your heart, and that like organs didn't work, but I didn't understand like at a real gut level the impact of the hormonal impact and
mhm.
how that changed like metabolism and cortisol and all of those things. Um, and I wish that I'd understood that better because I think that maybe if I'd really gotten it, that would have, and maybe not, but like we can dream.
Yeah.
I like to think that that would have helped me make better choices sooner, right? Because, you know, probably from my 30s on, Yeah, so like for the last maybe 10 to 12 years, that hasn't really been my approach in as extreme of a way. And
Yeah.
I would say that like at times things come up, but overall it's not like a way of being in my life. Um, Now I do make most of my decisions based on like, how does this impact my body as a system?
Yeah.
Well, I'm 41, almost 41 and a half. I know like you don't count half years, but my half birthday is Christmas, so I always like remember.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm like, I know I'm like nearing that, right? Um, but like there's such an impact on so many other layers beyond the like control or the image or the like actual physical weight or the how do you look like muscle mass.
Yeah.
Um and I've always been strong because I've always had to like move things.
Hmm.
So I can like lift a lot and move a lot even though I don't always look like I can.
Hmm.
Um but there's such a bigger like systemic piece to that puzzle
Yeah.
that just isn't looked at. Or at least when I was growing up, it wasn't, right? I'm not like it might be looked at now, but I didn't understand really like the deeper implications of how now I would still be dealing with the like metabolism issues, let's say,
Hmm.
of starving myself for multiple years and like really screwing that up.
Yep.
Um, I just like I didn't understand that that would be a thing that would
I'm
like not
yeah,
actually go away,
I'm with
right?
you with that because similarly, I tracked, I found my mom's Weight Watchers book. And so I just started doing it on the lowest points like you could possibly do. Then I had my own cutouts of the 17 magazine workouts or whatever, and I would like do those in my room. So like then I was even less points, right? So I thought
Yep,
that's good, right? You're like the most little points you can be is the best, right? And I remember, like you're saying, thinking that was a good idea. Or
right.
maybe you didn't think, I don't know if you thought it was a good idea, but I thought it was a good idea. Like I thought it was maybe healthy or maybe like skinnier the better, like the thinner the
Yeah,
better, like whatever better means. And I remember health class, nobody said restricting calories wasn't a good idea. And I kind of wish like we did. I don't like I loved health
yeah.
class
I mean, I
and
think
no.
restricting calories was encouraged.
Right. It was always about like how to like not eat so much, how to like not eat this or not eat that, but it was never really
Gotta
about,
burn the calories that you've eaten, to your point about doing the exercise to like reduce the weights or
yeah,
the points.
the point. Yeah. So to reduce your weight, right? And it was just like also to your point about like the military thing, like if you do these things, you get this result. And I was getting great results, like so it was this like really like nice confirming feedback loop of like this is a good idea until like it wasn't.
Right. Yeah. And like, maybe should I have thought like maybe it wasn't when my period started being messed up? Probably. Should I have thought it maybe wasn't a good idea when like I was fainting in the tub and the shower and like in the morning when I would wake up, I was fainting and we like couldn't like the doctors couldn't figure out what it was. Sure, like maybe that could have been a clue. And I do think that that goes like part of what that's about is that I think even like regardless of how I looked, um and I think at my like lowest, I got down to I think I was in like a size 5,
Mhm.
like a teens 5
Yeah.
at the time, whatever that was. And I
Mhm.
also just to like go back, I remember my mom talking, and she like still brings this up about how at her like at one point when she was still in her 20s before she'd had kids, because she didn't have us until in her 30s, um, that she would lay down and that her stomach would be concave, right? Like
Yeah.
she talks about that like as a memory, like
Yeah.
deep memory. And I think that like a big piece of it for me was about how I looked
Mhm.
and how I felt about my body. But I think like in a very cliched way, a big piece of it was also about control
Yeah.
and about um like what I could where I could exercise um something and get a result, right?
Hmm.
Um because there were other things happening in my life at the point, like at that point that I didn't have control over, right?
Yeah.
And being the oldest of five, and we were all very close in age, and it was a like chaotic household, and
Mhm.
there were other things, and I definitely like I do think that it wasn't all about my body image or like worrying about how other people thought about me. I think that
Mhm.
was a piece of it, but it wasn't all of it. So I think that that's also part of why those like physical health things or like the heart racing, and we've talked about that too.
Yeah.
Um, like those things wouldn't necessarily have even flipped as a piece because it wasn't just about the physical component, right?
Right. It was like you said, like you had some control, you saw results, look what I can do kind of thing, which is always nice when you're a teenager because you don't have, or even like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yep.
So we did talk about once before how you started to notice that that wasn't a good idea anymore and you didn't want to do that to your body anymore.
Yeah. I mean, I think I wasn't happy. Uh, I was like going to therapy from a pretty young age.
Mhm,
I mean, I like my parents took us with them to like a family counseling sort of thing with somebody that they did stuff with. And I was maybe 12 or 13. I know I was like seeing different people because I wasn't going to school. But I was too, like, I thought I was too smart for that and like played the guy. I was like, oh, let me tell you this whole thing that I believe that I don't actually believe to just
mhm.
see if I can get through this time. Um, but when I went to college, I knew that my college had free therapy
Mhm,
for any students. And so I was like, I'm going to make the most of my time here.
mhm.
Um, and it took a long time. And it really was about like getting more comfortable in myself, like in who I was and in myself as a person. And um, a big piece of that for me with therapy was not always like talking about other people. And I don't mean
Mhm,
gossiping about other people, I mean worrying about other people. For the first like year-ish and I had the same therapist for most of the whole time I was there. I went through somebody who was awful at the thing that I didn't like, but then I found this other woman that I worked with. Ellen was her name, and I remember I was probably a sophomore. I remember her at some point being like, "So you can keep coming and talking about how you're worried about like this person," and she could like rattle off the people's names, right? Because I had talked
mhm.
about them and the different things and like the things I was worried about with my parents and my siblings and whatever else. But we are here to talk about you and not just like you in relation to your concern about these other people. So like we worked together for a long time, and I think that she was really pivotal in helping me move from what had become, I would say, like pretty deep self-loathing
Mhm.
um, to a much more secure, and by secure I mean steady,
Yeah.
like a much steadier space of self-identity.
Mhm.
um and I think it's probably something that like really developed through my 20s with like a couple of key moments that I could point to
Yeah.
as far as interactions with other people, but I think that like that was a big piece of it. Um and I, when I went, like I studied at Oxford, and when I was there, I I moved a lot just because of the space, right?
Yeah.
Like I lived in a flat, I biked into the college, I biked to work, like I biked through town. I didn't have a car. I rode
Yeah.
the bus but not tons. And I worked at a pub, so I was like standing and walking and moving a lot. And I did sports again, and I like did crew, which I loved. Like I found a sport that I liked in college. Before, when I was like in the States, I had done a lot of academic stuff, and I was on
Yeah.
like the newspaper and the literary magazine, and I had a job, and I babysat, and I took 21 credits a semester most semesters. Um, but I didn't do any like sports because I obviously wasn't at the college like sports level and
Right.
extracurricular sports. Like, what is that?
Yeah.
Um, but when I was in Oxford, I joined a crew team and I loved it. Like, I
Yeah.
loved it. And so I think that was really healing to like find a sport again where it
Yeah.
was about moving my body, not about like my weight or my size or how I looked. And like we would do this thing called she called it Jedi rowing, where we would be rowing and we would like work to get in sync, and our coach would be on the bike path like riding as we were going, and we would get in sync and we would get in sync, and then she would have us close our eyes
Mhm.
as we were like sinking and rowing, and
Oh,
then she'd have us lift our oars and we would like glide on the water, and
wow.
like that feeling was just incredible. And I really came to understand that for me it was about like it really needed to be about the fact that I am a better person, and I don't mean like morally better. I mean I function better
Yeah.
when I move my body more. Um, because my brain works so much all the time
Yeah.
that and like thinking works,
Right.
not moving works. Um, but but it's like going and going and going, and it really needs that balance of that physical motion and movement.
Yeah.
Um, and then And then after college, I started doing rock climbing, which again, like it wasn't a team thing, it was an individual thing.
Mhm.
And I would do bouldering. But for me, it was really about like, what can my body do and where is it strong?
Mhm.
And I think a big piece of that came from the fact that I injured my back doing crew, maybe the first time because I was only like in a pit, like they had like a pit where you could practice,
Mhm.
where it was like a fake being in a boat with water. So you were like literally moving oars,
Oh,
right?
okay.
Um, and I definitely shouldn't have been rowing in the first race I rowed in because I'd only like been like on that thing 30 minutes total, but like they needed a body.
Oh, I
Uh,
see.
and so I definitely didn't learn like proper form. And I
Mhm.
and I herniated a disc in my back, and it like really fucked things up. But I think that that helped me come to a place where I really started to focus more on, like, as that healed, what my body could do, right?
Mhm.
And like really celebrating that rather than focusing on how it needed to look, right?
Okay.
Like
Do you,
really, or go ahead.
do you feel like the self-loathing was because it was more about how your body looked than what it could do? Or like,
Absolutely.
yeah, okay.
1000%. And I like attributed how I looked to whether or not anybody wanted to date me, and like
Mm,
what that had to do with my value or worth.
mhm.
Um, yeah, I mean, there was a lot of other like family stuff happening that isn't
Yeah,
relevant to this conversation that I think also contributed.
yeah,
Uh, but yeah, I think it was 1000% about how or like what I perceived was the value in how you looked,
right.
right?
And how that
Like,
was the only thing to measure.
right, that was the currency to like work in.
Yeah,
Um, and and so that really, yeah, that really shifted. I had some like really, really, really toxic boyfriends
Mm.
that I dated,
Mhm.
which helped me be like, oh, this is not,
Not a
don't
good,
need this. This does not actually add to my life in a
yeah,
beneficial way.
yeah.
Uh, but I, as I worked to get my back into a better place,
Mhm.
before I started rock climbing and then moving into rock climbing, um, there was just such joy there. And it was similar to the joy that I had felt during the time when I wasn't eating. So like really my junior and senior year of high school, I would run a lot, like
Mhm.
on trail running, and I loved that. And I like there was just a feeling, and it like was it runner's high maybe, but like there was a freedom to running on a trail without any music because like we didn't really like it wasn't a thing.
Yeah,
Um, I would have had to bring like a disc man.
yeah.
Uh, and being in nature in the woods, which was pretty important to my mom growing up, was like getting us in touch with what was outside. Um, I felt such really it was about the strength of like the movement of the body as I was running.
Yeah.
Uh, and the ability to do it without a bajillion people making noise like it was in my house.
Mhm.
There was just like a quiet power to it that I really loved.
Mhm.
And bouldering or rock climbing isn't quite the same, but there's like similar pieces. Like that moment when you reach for something and you like do ascend and your like legs push you up, because really that's like where women have their strength gravitationally, when you're like on the wall, like the send and you're like reaching for something and you know that you might not make it, and like that moment when you realize you're not going to make it and that you're going to fall back, like there's something about that that for me is very similar to how I felt running. So even though I can't run anymore in the same way, that rock climbing like really did it and really solidified like, oh my God, I was in such pain and such um like inability to do things.
Mhm.
And this was before the stricter regulation on pain medicine. So like when I was in college, my back doctor that I saw, because I was in another state, he was like, well, you can't do PT here because that's not covered by insurance. So here, take Vicodin and take Valium. So I took those for like 2 years because that was what he told me to do. Uh,
Mm.
and when I graduated and was back, I was able to go to PT, and then
Mhm.
I like tapered off the medicine.
Yeah.
Uh, and so like really seeing my back get better, I think, and being like, oh, so it can be this way or it can be this way, um, was a big piece of that. And then I think that that deepened when I had my back surgery in 2021, so
Mhm.
3 years ago, because that was the worst, like that was the worst pain I've ever experienced in my life, and my pain threshold's pretty high. And like I couldn't move. It took me like 45 minutes to not even like army crawl. I was kind of like dragging my body as I could,
Yeah.
like 6 feet. I couldn't go to the bathroom because my body was so um tense and like tight
Yeah.
from the injury in my back at that point. And I hadn't had back pain that was severe in a really long time. So I guess I became, ugh, this sounds like so gross coming out of my mouth, but like I really, and by gross I mean cliched.
Yeah.
Uh,
I feel yeah.
I
Sometimes it
really
happens.
I really became grateful for my body, right? Like
Mhm.
each of those times, there was a different layer of depth to the gratitude that I started to have, both
Mhm.
for like what my body did and like could do and what it wasn't doing, and like empathy and not not sorrow, but like sadness that I didn't get it earlier.
Mm,
That I didn't really understand that like we were together and
mm,
not something that I needed to subjugate or like punish.
yeah,
Because I think, I mean, that's we didn't really talk about the punishing piece, but like I think that was also a big piece of it, like when there were things happening,
yeah,
um, was like that mode of it. Um, and so I think that I have like a deeper and more complex awareness of an understanding of my body
hmm
and the and we speak of it like there's no good way in our language to talk
hmm
about it, right? Because like I'm saying my body, but like that's me, right?
right,
It's not like there's not actually a separation.
right,
And so I think that there have been real shifts in how the relationship shows up
yeah,
uh, over the years, and that really is what makes the difference between having that controlling aspect of my food, whether it's the overeating or the undereating,
hmm
um, all the time, and having it show up in like, little spurts every couple years, or
yeah,
things are like super stressful and being like, oh, I recognize what this is. Maybe I should dance, or maybe I should write. Oh, I'm writing like really dark, awful things about like controlling and like self-harm. Maybe I should see a therapist. Maybe
mm-hmm.
I should like take these others. And so really self-knowledge, right?
Yeah,
What are other things and like what are indicators that like, oh, you're like kind of eyeing that path and maybe that's not the one you want to walk down because you've been down that path and like you actually are really unhappy when you're there.
hmm
So like let's look at what's underneath that choice and what can you do about it?
yeah, I love that. It sounds like also this is kind of cliche too, but it sounds like you really started to be able to like listen to your body and really like listen to yourself because your body is yourself, right? So,
Yeah, yeah, I think that there was definitely and I think that that comes across also as like a comfort in my body now that people see and think like, oh, she has it figured out. And I don't.
mhm,
Uh, but I am generally comfortable because I know what I'm not willing to sacrifice. And
mhm,
for me, what I'm not willing to sacrifice is that relationship piece. Um, I'm not willing to sacrifice it to look thinner. I'm not willing to sacrifice it to um, worry about how people think I look.
mhm,
Uh, I am willing to negotiate it to like look at what's helping my body move in ways that will keep it strong,
mhm,
right? Like as I age, I am willing to negotiate to be like, okay, you know, this is impacting your joints, or this is impacting your back, or this is impacting your heart rate. So, like, what changes can we make to bring these things to a place that you're happier with?
mhm.
And so I think really being clear on what's not my bottom line, but to go back to the boundaries work where we met originally,
Yeah,
like what are the values that I have and what do I want to prioritize as my value in this moment,
yeah.
right? Hat
I
tip
love
to Randy
that.
Buckley.
Sorry, say that again.
Oh, I just said hat tip to Randy Buckley, boundaries as values in action.
Yeah. Uh,
Um, yeah.
I was so I want to ask, what advice would you give or encouragement maybe or however you want to phrase it to someone who's like feeling self-loathing because like of body stuff and like I think it's kind of maybe the obvious quote answer is like seek a therapist and
Yeah,
things like that. But like other than that, like if we were gonna
right.
like
Yeah.
not to
Well,
say don't right.
I I do think that seeing like professional therapist is really important. So I am going to touch on that for just a second,
Hmm.
but then go on to other things. I don't mean a coach.
Hmm.
I don't mean a like mindset specialist. I don't mean a dietitian necessarily. I really mean a trained therapist. It could be somebody who's like a licensed clinical social worker or a licensed practicing counselor or a psychologist, and somebody who's like the right fit for you, which I think can be really hard when you're in that crisis moment, right? Because like you need somebody and wait lists are so long and it's expensive, but finding somebody who's a match for you, I think is what's really important in that part of the process. Nobody's ever really been the same as Ellen. Like Ellen is definitely my high bar.
Yeah.
Even other people who were matches that I've worked with throughout the years, I've found two other people who I think were like good matches with other misfires in the middle.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that that's important. And then I think, there's that phrase that people say about like how you can't love others until you love yourself.
I'm rolling my eyes because Randy
But
talks about that a lot, and I love when she talks about it.
right. So I'm kind of gonna like parrot or paraphrase what Randy says, which is that like that's bullshit. Or at least I think this is what Randy says, because I don't actually I have another friend who talks about it a lot, but I think like that perpetuates when actually again it's like a together sort of thing, right? Like I think that there's an aspect of finding our self-love and our self-worth that comes from internal work.
Mhm.
Um, and we are people who are built to be in community. That is a critical part of our like evolution. It is part of what makes it necessary to like it is part of what is necessary for survival. It has been for thousands of years. Like that is normal. And so I think looking to key relationships for belonging and for mirroring when you can't, if I think back to what Ellen had me do when we were first starting, um, I have in one of my journals these like notes from people where she asked me to like ask people how they saw me or something like that, but like to pick selectively, you
Yeah.
know? um not to just random willy-nilly ask people, um and to write that down, right, to say like you're kind or you're thoughtful or you're one of the most frustrating people I know because you're very stubborn and you will stick to your argument and you don't give up, and that really gets annoying with blah blah blah, said with love, like that, like, and that's not exactly what that person said, but like I can
Yeah.
still see like echoes of it in my brain.
Yeah.
um so like finding those things, whatever they are for you, whether it's people or animals, um, and keeping them places where you can see them, right? So
Mm.
for a long time, I had stuff like that written on a giant long sheet of paper that I kept on my back, like on the door of my bedroom, so that when I would close my bedroom door, it was visible, but it wasn't visible to everybody outside around me.
Yeah.
Um, definitely in like the early 2000s, wrote with like markers on my mirrors in my house, like everywhere,
Oh.
everywhere. And like, did people see it? Sure. Like I wrote it. Um, and then I think for me, there's been a lot of, I don't know what the right word is. It's not comfort. It's not source, but I found a lot by looking to nature,
Mm.
whether that's looking to the relationships in nature or making sure that I'm spending time in nature,
Mhm.
spending time, whether that's gardening or going for a walk, things that help me kind of pull out from that onslaught of messages that we have coming at us about
Yeah.
how we look, because like I still care how I look,
Yeah.
right? I wouldn't have on this and this and be wearing like these overalls with a shirt that I
Okay.
like feel good in
Yeah.
didn't matter,
Yeah.
right? But I found things that like help me feel how I want to feel in the world that maybe like other people look at and are like, oh wow, she looks really fat in that. Okay, but I feel good in it,
Yeah.
right? Like it
Hmm.
feels aligned. I'm wearing earrings that I like and a bracelet and like a bracelet that somebody made for me and I'm pointing these out because I've had to take time to like figure out these things, right?
Yeah.
So I think finding those things for you that are like really yours and not from outside is
Mhm.
also really helpful.
Yeah, I love that. And I love looking at nature too, because it's like when you look at nature, it's not really asking permission really for anything, or it's not really like thinking I don't deserve to be here or whatever, you
Yeah.
know.
And there's such diversity in nature in like even if you just talk about trees, right? And like tree shapes and tree types
Hmm.
and when things flower and when they don't and whether they need water or whether they don't need water or the amounts of water or the amounts of sun or whatever.
Hmm.
And they're all beautiful in their own way. And
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
that is also equally cringe, like cliche. Sorry, I can't believe that those words came out of my mouth, but like actually, like I love looking at different types of trees. It's
Yeah.
amazing. Does it make any sense? No. Uh, it's amazing.
I know what you mean though, like beautiful. That's what I think. Everything in a lot of things in nature are beautiful in their own way. I mean, like it is really corny and cheesy and whatever, but it's just true. Do you have any like last thoughts or encourage other kinds of encouragement for for people with body stuff?
I just think it comes back to prioritizing those values for
Yeah.
yourself and
Hmm.
like finding what they are, right? Uncovering what they are for you and really leaning into those. And the more that you do it, the easier it gets. It never gets completely easy, but the more that you do it, the more that you practice it, the more that you like strengthen that muscle,
Yeah.
the easier it is to lean into that or to like remind yourself, oh yeah, actually I've done this before and no, a tiger didn't eat me.
Hmm.
Uh, or like I've done this before and oh, like actually doing
Doesn't.
this, that type of boyfriend, not great. Great. After I
Yeah.
dated that like dude that I'm thinking about, uh, I had like a little card that I kept in my car that because I'd gone up to visit my college, and visited the women's center, which had that weekend put these little cards together that were, I mean, they were literally like this big, right? And
Uh-huh.
like, like that wide. So like little tiny, almost business card size that were laminated that had like 15 warning signs of an abusive personality. And the dude that I dated met 13 out of the 15.
Oh,
And
wow.
I had like named the warning signs and like made choices and been like, oh, I see this, but it's okay. Two other people. So, so like I kept that card in my glove compartment, like drop down, not even glove compartment, but like the little drop down in my
Yeah.
car for years to be like, hey, remember, remember this. Remember this here. There's nothing worth this. There is nothing worth this. Nothing. Nothing is worth this. This is not going to make you feel better about yourself. It's not going to like, there's nothing about this that is going to be good.
Yeah.
Uh, and, and like not beating myself up for making that choice, right? Like
Mhm.
that even though I had made those choices, I had still recognized it sooner, even if I ignored the recognizing. Like I had recognized it right away.
Mhm.
And I had still like taken steps to get out of it,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Um, and so not berating yourself when you make mistakes
Yeah.
and
I
seeing that that still is like faster and different than before.
I love that, and that's such a good idea. Like, what a that's a really good idea for something to hand out to people too, and something to like leave in your car. That's such a good idea.
The only two that I didn't like have answers to were ones that involved animals because I hadn't seen him around animals, but like
Oh,
everything else, yeah, yeah,
interesting.
it was 1,000% a cringe moment. Like,
Wow.
wow, like I knew it was serious, but I didn't actually realize that it was like serious to this level, right?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's so interesting. And wow. Thank you so much for sharing all of your stories
Yeah.
and like, for being here. And, there was a lot, there was so much in there that I think so many people can relate to. And I really appreciate you sharing all that. So thank you so
Yeah,
much.
thanks so much for having me.